And joining us on the line, it is great to welcome to Flow, Mike McClellan. G'day, Mike. How you doing today?
G'day, Clayton. I'm very well, thank you, mate.
Pleasure to be chatting to you. It is. I'm speaking to one of the eldest statesmen of the music industry in this country, and I feel very honoured. So I need to say that. I feel I need to say that. And speaking of which, you've been in this industry for over 5 decades now. You must have some, with the times that we're going in at the moment, Mike, with all the COVID situation. You must have some mentoring advice that you can pass on to some of the young artists that I speak to on a weekly basis who are struggling and feeling a bit despondent with everything going on. What have you learnt? What sort of bit of advice can you pass on to these young ones?
Oh, gosh.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, you're right. The thing that is most obvious to me over the course of my life in this business, Clayton, is that you have to be prepared to adapt and change as both the performing environment and the recording technology and the media also go through huge change. Of course, when I first started out, I was recording on vinyl in a big studio on tape, and I've lived through all the changes that are now seen vinyl superseded, although in some markets it's making a bit of a comeback, but it's small. CDs are starting to disappear, and it's all mostly downloads and streaming services these days. But the thing that keeps coming back to me constantly is that for everybody who is trying to build an audience and generate concert numbers, you really have to be prepared to put yourself out there in the digital environment. You have to be prepared to sustain a continuous level of communication with your market via the digital environment. And I think also you have to be prepared to accept the fact that for a lot of performers and songwriters and musicians, it will inevitably be a struggle. And one of the things I've always advised young songwriters and young performers, and I taught at the Country Music Academy for about 6 years at one stage, is that you may be very lucky if you really crack it for a hit song or a song that generates a huge amount of audience engagement. But in the end, you will probably have to be prepared to accept the fact that unless you're very lucky, you may not have a long and sustained career that will feed you economically and keep your family alive, etc. And that you may have to look at ways in which you use your creative talent in other environments apart from necessarily just writing songs or playing guitar for yourself. You may have to look at ways in which you can generate income through other avenues. And to some extent, that's one of the things that I did during my career. I've always been involved in music, but I turned a lot of my attention to the advertising industry and writing music and songs, etc., for film and television, and that in so many ways sustained me as a writer and kept me creatively alive and fully engaged. Some
very sage and wise advice. Thank you for that, Mike. I will certainly pass that on to all the young artists that I speak to, and they know that they can have a future, but they just need to improvise and adapt and go with the flow. Go with the flow, as we say here at Flow. Now you've got a song that we're going to talk about, "If Sorrow Should Find You," but just before we get to that, you released a song a while back called "Letter to America." And there is an interesting Bob Dylan connection to this, and I'm just curious to know, as a Bob Dylan fan, and I understand you are as well, can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd written the lyrics, Clayton, to the song, and the lyrics were essentially about my distress at what I was seeing in the America that had been so influential in my recording career and my life as a songwriter. And having written the lyrics, I realised I'd quoted Bob Dylan directly in the last 2 lines of my song, taking the last 2 lines of one of his great songs called It's Not Dark Yet. And the last 2 lines of his song say, "It's not dark yet, but it's getting there." And I thought, oh gosh, I probably can't quote Bob without getting permission to do so. So I got in touch with his publishers in Australia who look after his catalogue here, and they said, well, look, fill in this 3-page document, we'll send it off. It'll probably take 6 to 8 weeks, and it's highly unlikely you'll get permission. So I thought, I'll change the lyrics. And then I remembered that my very dear friend Danny O'Keefe, a wonderful, wonderful American songwriter, is a very rare writer indeed, in that he has a co-write on a song called Well, Well, Well with Bob Dylan.
Oh.
So I sent Danny a note and said, mate, can you give me any contacts inside Bob's management company or his publishing company that I can talk to and perhaps ask if I can have permission to quote Bob? He sent me back a note saying, here's Jeff Rosen's email. Jeff's Bob's manager. Send him the lyrics, but, mate, I would say my advice would be change it because I don't think they'll give you permission. They're very protective of his copyrights. So I sent off an email to Jeff Rosen with a copy of the lyrics one morning at about sort of 8:30 our time, and then within an hour or so, I got a note back from Jeff Rosen saying, hey, Mike, love it, go ahead.
Wow.
Couldn't believe it.
Within an hour?
I was really stunned.
Wow, within an hour, after thinking that this is going to take, 2 months possibly, and it's within an hour. That's incredible.
Oh, it was extraordinary. I was really blown away, Clayton, and I sent off a note thanking Jeff very much and thanking Bob and thanking my mate Danny O'Keefe, and sent a quick note to the publishers here in Australia saying, Bob's given me permission. Or they wrote back and said, please send us the email confirming that. We don't quite believe it.
And
Which was actually remarkable. And of course, given that connection and the permission that Bob Dylan had given me, the song picked up a lot of interest in America, where of course Dylan is pretty much God among the creative community, and it got a lot of reaction. It was actually quite critical of Trump in particular, but it was also written out of a deep respect for the America that had creatively influenced me so much as a young songwriter, and so many of America's great writers had a very powerful influence on me as a songwriter, learning how to write songs. So it was written with a degree of sadness as to what's been happening in America of late. So that'll be on the new album, along with If Sorrow Should Find You.
And the new album, that's Behind Every Mask, and is that coming out next year, I understand now?
It is. We've delayed the release, largely because I can't tour, and I thought, well, I'll put it out when I'm on the road. I've got the opportunity to do face-to-face chats, with guys like you, for instance, and when I'm in front of an audience and playing concert, because my audience, they still love to get a physical copy in their hands. They still love a CD with a copy of the lyrics. So it's important for me to get out in front of them and have the new album to be able to sell to them after the concerts.
Just to quickly go back to Bob Dylan for a sec, I know you're a big fan, so what's your favourite Bob Dylan song of all time and your favourite to perform live?
I love It's Not Dark Yet. It's the most gorgeous, gorgeous song and stunning lyrics. But of course, some of the classics I used to sing regularly, although I don't do them much these days. But I still love Masters of War, and I still love Hattie Carroll. There's any number of songs that I grew up first when I was playing that I used to play in concerts. And it's almost impossible to pick a favourite Bob Dylan song. Tangled Up in Blue is another one I love because there are so many good ones.
One thing I've noticed with Bob's as a songwriter is that he brought a bit of politics into it in a way that it sort of got into your consciousness and you could relate to it and you could form an opinion. And there seems to be a lot of that missing now in the songs today. What do you think? How do we get our young songwriters to engage in a political way, the way that Bob Dylan did, that he taught a generation?
I think it's very hard, unfortunately. That said, there are a lot of very good songwriters, but they're writing at the sort of folk and community level about the social issues that we are being confronted with. One of the things that's most engaged me in the course of the last 3 or 4 years has actually been the social environment in which we live. And a lot of what I'm writing and a lot of what's been recorded for the new album actually deals with significant social issues. One of which in particular was the Royal Commission into child abuse, because I'd had contact over the years with several men who'd been abused as children, and my brother, the now retired Justice Peter McClellan, actually headed up the Royal Commission. So I knew what he was going through over the 5 years that the Commission ran, and it influenced one of the songs in particular, and in fact it influenced a couple of songs. I've also dealt with other issues such as internet abuse. I've got a song in particular about the environment and what we're not doing to counter the impact of climate change. And I think probably that for me is an extension of the tradition that I grew up in, because when I was first starting to write and play in the late 60s and into the 70s, as you said quite correctly, Bob Dylan was writing very powerful political stuff in those days, as indeed were a lot of other young songwriters as well. And you're right, it's declined a little, although, of course, Midnight Oil have been very, very focused on so many big social issues, and they've been a very powerful influence in that regard. But like most of those bands of that era, they're getting on a bit, so I don't hear as much as you've rightly identified of the political criticism and comment coming from some of the younger writers as I once might have.
Yeah, when I see Midnight Oil now, I tend to be sitting down watching them instead of dancing around like an idiot like I was 30 years ago. So I know what you mean there. I can totally get that. And the song that we're going to get to here, If Sorrow Should Find You, you talked about these issues on your album, which is called Behind Every Mask, that'll be coming out. It is a bit of an issue, that one that I think it's touched just about everyone. I don't think they would be more than 2 degrees away from knowing someone that's gone through the issues that you talk about and you sing about in this song. And that's how close was it to you, and how hard was it to write it as well?
It was interesting, Clayton, because I began to write the song at the end of 2019. And there's a line in the song which ultimately led me to the title for the album. And the lines say, you'll search through your past to find every mask hides questions you'll ask and repeat. And I was using the term mask in that song then as a metaphor. I wasn't looking at it in the sense in which we now, obviously enough, all understand it, where we all had to wear masks to avoid picking up this terrible virus. But at the same time, the song was written initially because a good friend of mine sadly took his own life and left his widow with 2 small girls. The guy was a wonderful, wonderful musician, only in his mid-40s, and it left a huge hole in the music industry. He'd recorded on my 2 previous albums. He'd done all the artwork for the albums. He'd done all the photography. He was a brilliant, brilliant man, and sadly, obviously enough, very troubled. And it just stunned everybody in the industry. And ironically enough, the song has now become so pertinent for the times that we are living through, when there are so many people who've been severely affected by the impact of COVID-19 and have lost friends and family to this dreaded virus, that it was an unanticipated outcome of the writing of the song when I first finished, but it's become very pertinent, unfortunately.
The line, in a wounded soul, love can still console, just that wounded soul reference, and it got to me because it made me think about the person that I know that took their life, and I didn't know it at the time that they were that, and it just sort of, they were a wounded soul, and just trying to remember them and to recognise, why didn't I recognise that they were wounded before? And it just,
that's something, sadly, that everybody who's close to someone who's taken their life often says. They didn't fully understand the depth of distress that was going on within that person until it was too late. And that's a terrible thing for all of us to have to live through who might be close to someone who takes their own life. And, it's very pertinent that we have Are You OK Day, because that question has to be asked much more often than we might be inclined to do.
And if anything that Mike and I have been discussing, folks, you're listening to and you think you need to talk to someone about it, remember Lifeline is available, 13 11 14. They're available 24/7. And, of course, have a look at the ruok.org.au website. There is a wonderful page there of some links that maybe a service there is absolutely perfect for you. But check that website out, ruok.org.au, and Lifeline, 13 11 14. 13 11 14 is the number. Now, there is a line also in the song, Mike, on a more positive thing about dancing in the rain. And I just love that because as a kid, I used to love doing that when it was raining and my mum would be screaming at me to come inside. But I just love being out in the rain. And as a big kid, I still like doing it as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things we all have to learn to do in times of distress is actually work our way through it. Don't succumb to it. Don't collapse beneath it. And if you have to, dance through what can be sometimes a very, very difficult circumstance in your life. But in the end, there is a way through. And I think, organisations like Lifeline, which incidentally my younger brother is on the board of and has been for a long time, and Beyond Blue and the Black Dog Institute, which is another organisation that the foundation of which I'm the patron support, are always there to help. They're necessary. Sadly, they're very necessary, and if anybody's going through some distress, they should be reaching out to them.
Yes, that they certainly do. When you were coming up with the melody and all that for this song, how was that? Was that something that just came to you, or was it a struggle to work through?
No, actually, it came fairly quickly, Clayton.
Yeah.
And ironically enough, when you hear the song, it becomes fairly evident that actually the chorus is me singing in falsetto.
Yeah.
And when I first wrote the song, I did that quite naturally. I quite naturally slipped into falsetto to sing the chorus. And I thought, I've never done that on an album before. But it worked so beautifully, and it was so clearly almost predestined that I should do it that way, that we didn't change it, we left it as it was. Ironically enough, though I wrote it on guitar, I don't play on the final version. My producer and I, Matt Fell, decided that it was better I didn't play, and that we work it through as it's now been produced. So it's basically just my voice on this one. I don't play guitar.
Well, Matt doesn't like your guitar playing. What's going on? What's he trying to tell you here?
No, he actually loves my playing, but I've always said to him that despite the fact that I write on guitar and I'm a reasonably accomplished guitar player, if you don't think that I should play on something and that there's a better way to interpret the song, please don't hesitate to tell me and to proceed in that direction. Because in the end, as a songwriter, I'm really only interested in serving the song in the best possible way. And if that means I don't play, that's fine.
Do you play and write songs with the same guitar or different ones?
It varies, actually. I've got several guitars. I've got rid of a lot. I used to have many more than I have at the moment, but I'm very fortunate. I have 3 guitars that were made for me by a wonderful guitar maker in Adelaide called Brian de Grucci. And Gruch made some of the most beautiful guitars for many, many fine players in Australia. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago. But the guitars he made for me are stunning. They're all different, and in so many ways, the character of each of them informs certain songs. So I've written songs across all 3 of them, and I have an old Gibson Hummingbird, which I've had since 1965, which I use for writing other songs. And all my early songs were written on it before I really started to collect more instruments. So, yeah, the guitars have a voice that's suitable for certain types of songs and not for certain other songs. So I write on a variety of instruments.
I was talking to a legendary guitarist recently who said to me that when he's looking for a new guitar, he can just touch it and he can tell whether it's got a feel that's going to connect with him. And so what you're just saying, I get that, I understand that.
Oh, very much so. And, guitar players, good guitar players, generally buy a lot of instruments. And almost invariably, they will tell you that each instrument speaks to them in a slightly different way, and they have learnt to understand how to get the best out of each of their instruments, which is exactly what I've done with mine.
You certainly have. All right, Mike McClellan, I would love to keep talking to you, but I feel we better let things go. And I know the folks want to hear this song now. We just want to point out your album, which is going to be called Behind Every Mask, will be available next year. Any idea what sort of time frame next year, Mike?
Yeah, we're looking at March.
Okay. Hopefully by then you'll be touring and we'll get to be able to see you as well and hear the song.
Indeed.
We've got the song here. It's all ready to go for the Flow listeners. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today on Flow. I really appreciate it. Please take care and hopefully we'll get to see you soon. But if you could please introduce the track for all the listeners.
Clayton, thank you very much, mate. It's been a great pleasure to be interviewed by someone who clearly is passionate about it. This is a song, folks, called If Sorrow Should Find You, from a new album which will be out early in 2022, called Behind Every Mask.
When the world that you knew falls in on you and all sense of reason retreats, you search through your past and find every mask hides questions you